watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride can make things right. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. Gotta wish tonight, baby, please set your thoughts aside. 'Cause it's been so long, maybe we could drive into the dawn. Speeding up, blurring out the lights. Soon your eyes will be the only blue. Give me more minutes of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to forget. We could go nowhere. Give me more hours of this peace. We could go anywhere. This is our chance to escape. Let's go nowhere. We could go nowhere.
Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on strategic HR. The title is Going from Operational to Strategic HR, Lessons from the Field. And my name is Pernille Brun. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Session. And with me at the panel today, I have Tej Stalenhof from Simpa, and I have Pia from Fabricius from Copenhagen Malmö Port. And they're gonna introduce themselves in a minute. I'm very excited that we have so many signups, more than 100 from all over the world. So please say hi in the chat and tell us why you are attending this webinar today. And if you have any questions for the panelists or any comments in general just about this topic, please share them in the chat, because we can also include some of your comments and also some of your questions to the panel, and also we can open up the discussion. So if there's anything you would like them to shed light on, please share in the chat. So just to get us off to a good start, I'm thinking about the word strategic. I made a video a few days back where I was reflecting on my own Strength Finder profile, and I have strategic in that. And then I was thinking, how do they define it? And I looked it up, and it was something about spotting patterns and being really good at finding ways forward, even in times of adversity, and finding the best way with the resources you have at hand. And so I was thinking, okay, when you apply that to HR, it of course also must mean that you take the resources at hand and look at how can you then prioritize between it. And you can also think about what does it mean to be strategic and tactical and maybe more operational, and look at that definition that we often see out there about what does it mean to be strategic. So you have the operational level where you mainly function on the day-to-day operation. You have the short-term objectives at the tactical level where you can more focus on resource allocation and strategy implementation. But at the strategic level, we expect people to operate on a level where they look at the long-term intent and focus, and also how we can position ourselves. Do we have the skill sets needed? And if not, how are we gonna bring that along? So I'm curious to hear, when we open up the discussion in a minute between Thijs and Pia, how they look at what does it even mean to be strategic in the first place, and then when you apply that to the HR function, how can we translate that? And the reason why we are opening up on a webinar with this theme is that we often hear that HR deserves a seat at the table. But what if you ask yourself, why do they deserve a seat at the table? And why do we need them there in the first place? And when HR is presented at that level, what is it that they can actually offer? And what if they are not, but they would like to be? How can we then position ourselves as HR to get there? And what hinders us? And how can we then maybe mitigate those different things? So, Thijs, why don't you just give us a short introduction of who you are, and then we'll hear from Pia, and then we'll open up the discussion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Pernille. And thanks for everyone dialing in right now and watching us discuss. I'm actually really excited to be here today. So yeah, my name is Thijs. I am originally Dutch and have lived in Denmark for many, many years. I've taken some trips for work, as I said, abroad. And right now I am the CPO, or Chief Product Officer, for Simpa, which is an HR system platform. And prior to Simpa, I worked for a company called Swile, which is a large employee benefits provider in France, and other places that I've been, for example, Booking.com, Tradeshift, and Apple. So
you've been around. That's for sure.
I finally found a way into HR software, and yeah, of course, that's a large part of my interest here, and yeah, very keen to see how the discussion develops.
Yeah, and we're keen to hear a perspective from someone who is not within HR, but is looking at it from, of course, that perspective of helping HR leverage their influence, but also in general, just, you know, what's it like to work with HR when you're not yourself from the first point of view in HR. So that's gonna be very interesting. How about you, Pia? You have the title of being within HR, the CHRO position, right?
Yeah, right. And thanks for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here, and then hi to all of you attending the webinar. As you said, I'm Pia, and I'm the CHRO in Copenhagen Malmö Port. We are a commercial harbor and logistics company, represented in 8 segments: cruise, bulk, container ships, and so forth. We have about 350 employees, and I've been here for almost 5 years now. So I've been an HR professional since 2007 on the C-level or C-suite positions. In various industries: FMCG, roofing, candy and food production, manufacturing. And I've had different assignments in those positions, everything from turnarounds to mergers and culture changing assignments. So it's been it's always, by the way, always about culture. So that's where we end all the time. Before that, I've been around. And I actually started my career on the business side of things. So it wasn't a given that I ended up in HR, but I started as the COO of Tivoli Gardens. That's an amusement park in Copenhagen with 600 employees. And then when I had the offer to turn sides, so to speak, I found it interesting because I have been the executing HR side of things. But that's also where my standpoint still is. I have always focused on the business side.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe that will bring some perspective into how do you leverage yourself to become strategic at that level, and maybe you can share some of your experiences, Pia, from your journey. But guys, I'm curious to hear a little bit more from you about why is this topic of interest to you in the first place? What is it that you've seen out there, and what perspectives do you have to offer on the theme today?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, of course, first and foremost, as Chief Product Officer of an HR software company, I'm bound to be interested in this topic, right? It's obviously where the industry seems to be heading. There's a lot of analysts and conferences and so on talking about that subject. But it's also like very, very personal to me because as a senior leader for many years, I really want a strong HR function, backing me up, helping me out, working together on getting the strategy executed. And what I've seen in my various engagements has always been that if strategy fails, it's very frequently not the strategy itself, it's the connection towards the people and the changes that you may need to make around people, whether it's retraining or reorganization or massive hiring or whatever it might be. And all of those things end up in one way or another involving HR. And, the better that collaboration actually works, the more the business can keep moving. And it seems so obvious. And maybe seeing a little bit ahead to that question of why should HR even be at the table, right? It's clear like that function is the real deal, and it's an area that isn't really covered anywhere else. And it's something where leaders such as myself really do need that support and the knowledge to be able to do what they need to do. So from that perspective, I'm very keen to see more of that. And I've seen little bits and pieces here and there. I'm not seeing it broadly, and sometimes that surprises me. Sometimes it disappoints me. And I'm really just keen to get it there. Oh, Pernille, you are muted.
Is it the representation you're not seeing more broadly, or is it more that people are not offered that seat at the table in the first place?
I think it's a bit of both, and here, coming from, of course, now the product side of the house, right, inside of a company, this is also a relatively new function to be at board level, right? Like when I started in product management many, many years ago, there was no talk of a CPO, of anything C-suite related to product, right? If you were lucky, you had a CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and maybe underneath them at some layer, there were some product people. Maybe the product people reported into marketing. All of those things. And nowadays, it's pretty well understood that practically everybody is looking at product and product management, and a CPO role is very, very normal. So that evolution, happens everywhere. You can see it in marketing, and you can see it, with finance and so on. So why not HR then, right? It just makes sense to me.
It's very interesting because we looked into how many people are represented at that level if you look at the research, and it turns out that there might be more than we actually think. So if you look at this graph here, we have, who does HR report to? Is it the CEO or the CFO or the Chief Operating Officer, which is the largest chunk of outside the other functions there? It's actually more than I would have expected when we started out here. It's 61% when you look at this research, at least, and there might be other numbers out there, but it seems like there are more than we tend to think. And Pia, I'm curious to hear your perspective on this, because how did you end up at that level? Because we know also if it's 61%, we still have a vast majority out there who are also not at that table yet. So how did you end up in your seat?
I had the easy way because I was hired into that level. So unproven, I was hired into that level. So I had a CEO who was risk willing and believed, as Theis does, that this is something that can actually bring value. That if we work closely together in a management team, that we have all competences represented, then we will get the best result for the company and for the business. So this was his thoughts, and that's why he recruited on that level. So it was up to me to prove that I earned the place in the first place. And actually, Theis, you said a very interesting thing, because he had kind of the same view that HR was the most visible and was often, in his perspective, creating most value in crisis. In times of crisis. And executing a strategy is a mini crisis, so to speak, because you have to do it in a fairly short time. You have a specific objects and you have objectives that you need, goals that you need to meet, and often you have some pressure in one or the other way around your execution of the strategy. So it's sort of a mini crisis. And if you look upon it that way and compare it to in a real crisis, for instance, during the pandemic or during the financial crisis in the zeros, what you do is that you go in and you very quickly evaluate what do you need to be done to meet the goals, meet the objectives, and then set action to it very, very fast after making a plan. I work with a 5-step model, 5-step process when I do that, and also when I build strategies. And that's what you will actually show the results very quickly. So if you have to let people go, you will show a result very quickly that, and in the bottom line of the accounts will show that you save some money after the redundancies has been made and so forth. So in strategy execution, I think it's a little of the same thing, because you will very quickly show results that matter in the business. Those are my thoughts on it. So is it easily done? No, it's not easily done.
If I may, I think when that happens, and I think this is actually very insightful, right? To call a strategy a sort of mini crisis. I'd never heard it described like that before, but I think it's a good one. I think what you also tend to see is the gaps in your organization appear really, really quickly, right? Both in terms of the culture, if their culture is able to sort of withstand this strategy change, they're able to get on board again. But also in terms of skills and ability to work together, etc. I mean, it stretches an organization a lot. And it's usually then again, like I said, the component where you connect the strategy to the people, that I would say, hey, HR can have a huge role there in terms of essentially preparing the ground in the first place to have a resilient organization, but also to help kind of expound that strategy towards everyone in the company and train, get the right competencies in, the right tooling, whatever it is you need. So I think that is something where I don't see where else that would belong. That's I don't see finance doing that. It's just no knock on finance, but that's just not what they're set up to do.
No, so what you're saying is that there's a certain skill set in the HR function that goes beyond spreadsheets and numbers and paying people a salary and making sure we have a hiring plan and things like that. You also need to consider the culture and how to implement. And what you are saying is also that if you feed that in to the discussion when you make your strategic decisions, then you own your seat, or what do you mean, Pia, when you say that this is where you see HR most visibly in the organization in those times of
but it's also very data driven, I must say. So in a crisis or in your everyday strategic work, HR wise, you need to be data driven. So if you go in and facilitate a discussion or dialogue with the commercial team or or elsewhere, you need to have your data in order. So how much, how many, where, how, blah blah. You need to be very data driven. What will we get out of this if we go this way? We'll get X, Y, Z, Y. So very data driven. So if you don't have data, get data. Because that's what you do in the crisis. You have exact numbers, you have exact targets, you have exact things to measure up against, and those are all data. So if you have them, if you understand the metrics and the data, then you are pretty far along the way. I think, in my perspective. I don't know if that ties. If you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's actually something I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. Of course, especially since I joined Simpa last year, and it's a tricky one, right? Because clearly the data is available, and the tools are available to get that data to a large degree. But I think it also implies a lot of collaboration with other areas of the business, and first of mind for me then is finance, right? The number of times that I've been in organizations whereby nobody even knew the open headcount was.
Okay,
but that seems to be a continuous problem, where it's just like the financial impact of hiring people and your organization, and anytime there is a strategy shift or a crisis, and that needs to be evaluated, oftentimes it takes weeks to just get to a number of like, oh, well, we actually have, this is not a real open head count. And yeah, this was promised, but we never, used it. And oh, there's something here, but we don't know what it is. And it tends to be, at least from my personal leadership experience, one of the areas that is very, very hard to get those clear numbers. And oftentimes it's the first time in the crisis that you see those numbers. So as a leader, you're like, okay, now we have these numbers, like where were they before? And, how have they evolved? And, so that it's usually as a receiving party, it's a little bit like, oh, okay, I understand these numbers, but okay, now I need to think through, okay, what does this really mean? So I think that's also part of that strategicness of not just having the numbers in the crisis, but being able to take those same numbers at a different date and understanding them as well.
And there's so much data out there. So if you were to say a few words about prioritizations here, what kind of data would you like to show your organization to be considered strategic? And what kind of data do you present here on a regular basis for your organization, for instance?
Well, data for benchmarking, so outside the company, in your line of business, it's always interesting to see how are we compared to others in different ways. We do it within the work environment, health and safety, LTIFR, lost time incident rates. Where you compare yourself to others. Do we have many incidents or not? So that kind of data is good to have from the outside of the company. But also then you need to compare it with the inside data. If you have to make decisions, strategic decisions, for instance, you have to know how your workforce will develop in the next 5 years. We have a big amount of employees right now in my company, born just after the Second World War. So we know that they will go to pension in a short while. So we have a 4-year opening, a 4-year window, according to Danish and Swedish law, when they can actually go into pension. So we have to do that calculation and say, how many will go when? That's data, hardcore data. We know their ages, we know what kind of pension schemes they are surrounded by or captured by, so we can actually write forward when will they go in pension. So what does that need for a lineup of new employees, succession planning, but also hiring strategies for that situation. So that's one use of data, inside data.
And when do you bring it into the table? Yeah, and Thijs, you also have a question or a comment maybe.
Well, I'm wondering how often you then combine that data with more operational, like business data, whether that's the quality of the product that you deliver, or the speed, like more these sort of operational metrics, because those, of course, need to be related to what are people's skills, their engagement, etc. And this is something that I've personally not really seen HR do, but I've always wondered about it, because like at the end of the day, it's great if everybody's super engaged, but there is no productivity, right? We're assuming the one will lead to the other, but maybe with some of that benchmarking that you were talking about just now, it becomes clear that, hey, look, we're actually behind the industry when it comes to our productivity, and that of course has a bottom line impact immediately, right?
Yeah, and you said it yourself, because I think it's based on the industry, because different industries may have different challenges at different times. So that's where I think HR should be awake and be proactive, and look out for those signs in the future, so to speak. What is relevant for us to look at? So when I bring up the matter of pensions in CMP, then it's a matter because it's a very male dominated workplace with a lot of mainly born after the Second World War. So if you're interested in your data, then you know where to address it and when and how to address it. And of course, it's addressed to the operations in this case, but also on the C level to discuss what will we do in this situation. Should we go with the new hires? Should we go with apprentices, or should we do hiring directly into the workforce? So what is the strategy here? And that's
And
something we
are
need to
those questions you raise, or is it something you come up with a solution for right away, or how do you go about that?
we raise a discussion first and foremost, because I can bring up for solutions of suggestions for solutions, but in the end, it's the business that needs to make that decision. So I raised the discussion in the first place. I might actually also get some good feedback on new solutions that I haven't thought of. That happens all the time. So you should be quite humble about that. So it's a discussion in the first place, and then we will make a suggestion to solutions, perhaps even more suggestions, because often there's not just one solution. Often you need to have a plan A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Thijs, when you've seen it work really well, the collaboration part that you mentioned with HR, what is it? What kind of best practices? There was someone in the comments saying, I'm attending this webinar because the word best practices attracted my attention. So if you were to speak about best practices within this field, seen from your experience, what does that look like? What does good look like?
Yeah, I mean, I have some good examples from previous employers. Could be anything from, really being good at empowering your leaders within an organization. Again, if you're going to execute strategy of any kind, and if you're going to be strategic as HR, you're going to need to work with all the managers in the company, right? You can't do an individual one-on-one approach for everything. And so this is a lever, this is how you scale. And that kind of works for every function, right? So it would work for HR as well, except it of course has a different sort of angle on the topic. I've seen the sort of real strategic best practices work generally quite well if the company is growing and there's money. Like for example, when I was working at Booking, we were hiring like crazy, right? And so there was a huge pipeline, and the whole recruitment department was very well structured. As a result, they therefore had an amazing learning and development department as well, because of course, as soon as you onboard, you start that track. So they kind of built it out around the fact that they needed to scale. And so that worked amazingly well. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's other areas as well where these kinds of practices work. I think when you then get back to the crisis and you say, okay, there's a crunch, maybe we need to restructure. I've been through a few of those in my days as well. It tends to get a lot harder, right? There's less budget, and then there is less of I think, as you started out by saying, Pernille, this way of being strategic to work within the limitations that you've been presented. I think you phrased it slightly differently, but that was basically what I think you were saying, right? That you find the solution even though you are under constraint. Mm-hmm. And that's usually where I've seen it sort of break. And that's, I would love to see how you would then do best practices in those kinds of scenarios, right? And again, there, I think a lot of it needs to come back to how do you work with the rest of the organization? Are you purely a facilitating function and what you call a horizontal business unit, or are you really engaging with everyone and leveling up, essentially setting more guidelines and frameworks and being essentially less involved in the day-to-day and giving that to some of the leaders. And here I've talked to some companies, for example, and funnily enough, they were in tech that really came to HR quite late. And they had a very, very small HR department. And they kind of, I think, jumped on this notion of what I think is being called agile HR. And of course, agile comes from tech in the first place, right, as a concept. And that started working really well for them. They were really just saying, hey, look, we set the overall guidelines and the parameters, and then we hand a bunch of tooling and processes over to the organization, and they execute it. And all we do is we check the results, we follow the metrics, and we steer where we need to. So that's a very different approach rather than the sort of very hands-on operational up. This was very much sort of strategy on down. Okay. And that was a super interesting thing to talk about.
So is there a third way? So rather than just, maybe from the operational part leading upwards, or implementing whatever is coming from the top, is there a third way maybe where HR can position themselves differently? Maybe you do it already, Pia. Can you shed some light on that?
Actually, I would say both, because I think it depends a little bit, as you also talk about, Thijs, what size company you're in. Because if you are in a small or mid-sized company, resources will not be as vast as if you're in a big-sized company. So hands on the ball is or the number of hands on the ball will be different, and you will be able to do different things. So in my experience, from the jobs that I've had in the businesses and the companies I've been in, we've been mid-sized or small or mid-sized companies. So we have to be a little more creative about doing both, because we have to be great at both the operational level and the strategic level. So we have actually done both, building it up from operational and setting the framework, structures, policies, and so forth, and putting that out there for the organization to live it. And then supporting from the bottom, for middle management or for middle leaders, to actually train them in doing HR in their everyday lives, the tasks that they need to do. That's it. That's the experience I come with.
Yeah.
And I have to pull this in because, but there's no time. That's something we sometimes hear, right? How do you carve out time in the first place? I don't know, Thijs, if that was something you were about to talk about. Or...
You flashed that pyramid earlier, and I always find it very pernicious when people put up pyramids of these types, right? There's different versions of the same thing, but it really makes you feel like, oh, okay, you need to be building this bottom layer first, and then you build this tactical layer in the middle, and then somehow from up on high, magically somebody will come and hand you the key to strategy, and it's like, no, that doesn't happen. It's just exactly my own journey as a leader. You find out you have to take it, right? You have to make that time to build these longer term plans. And whether you're in operations trying to, maybe be in support or something, and you're fighting thousands of tickets every day and you can't hack it, and you're just in the trenches fighting with your troops. Yeah, that's great. And that's important. But if you never take the time to then say, hey, where do we actually want to be? And I see Joep on the chat here made that point, right? If you don't look at that desired future state and really start strategically planning towards that and taking the consequences of that decision, which is also important, then you'll never get out of that hole, as it were. So I think, you need to find that time and spend that time, because it will pay itself back in spades for sure.
But maybe, Pia, you can shed some light on how do you find that time? Because what I experience when I engage with HR is that they're pretty busy already, right?
Yeah, that's true. And as Thijs always also says, you have to make yourself time. And if you're not a very disciplined person like myself, then you need to use your calendar to block time and make time. Because if you don't do that, you won't get it done. You won't think strategic thoughts on how to get there, or what do you want to do, or what does the future look like. Then you won't do it between two operational tasks on a Tuesday. So I block days, half full days, where I do strategic work. And then
what does that look like for you? What is strategic?
Part of that strategic work is I always look for inspiration outside the job that I'm in. What does others do? How have they gone about it? I will look into different industries, but also within my own industry. What does good look like for them, and what are their thoughts about it? What's the structure they work within? So, and then I talked inside the organization. Of course, we wanna in specific areas, we want to work out a plan for this or that. What do you think about that? And then all of this, these channels come together, and I start forming a plan. So if it's a new workplace that I haven't just started in, then I would start with, able, willing, and ready. Are we able, willing, and ready to do this?
Okay.
I will do it with the HR team. I will do it with the management team, and I will do it with the business, with the commercial team, to see
Alright.
are we able to walk the walk towards strategic HR. Are we willing to do it? Also with the investments that perhaps needs to be done, and are we keen to get started? So so
And you start with HR, but then you also maybe make this exercise with other parts of the organization.
absolutely, because if you don't have the support from top management and your peers in the management group, then you're really up for a hard run. So you need the support from that level, but you also need the support from the business, that they want to talk to you and they want to have a dialogue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're building on something Ty said before about being collaborative and being, asking questions into their insights and inputs. But doesn't that then put you in a seat where you are only on the receiving end?
That's the first step of the 5 steps that I work. It's a kind of a process, 5-phase process. You need to understand things before you can actually fix it or contribute to it, I think, in my opinion. So if you do not understand the business, then you might choose some wrong solutions or get going in the wrong direction. So if you want to plan for the future, which is in my eyes are the strategic, that's the future plus a plan, the needs plus a plan, then you will get wrong solutions if you don't understand what it is you need to fix or be ahead of.
Okay.
So that's the first step. That's understanding, and that's questions. If you don't understand the industry, if you don't understand the business, then you don't talk business, then you just talk HR.
Okay.
This is another way of getting some of that time, right? Like it sort of feeds in on itself, because if you have a strategy, you should also know that, let's say, out of your entire employee life cycle that you're, for example, trying to get into place, there are going to clearly be certain areas that you're going to care less about than you do others, right? Depending on what that business need actually is. And if you go through the motions purely operationally and you're just putting all of those processes in place, most of the business is going to go like, why are we doing this now? Like all of a sudden, middle of a close of quarter, and HR comes in and says, we need to do a skills assessment for everyone. And you're like, what? Why now? Like we have like this long, like why? It just becomes very difficult to then engage with the rest of the business if there doesn't seem to be an apparent connection between the two, right? So kind of making sure that you then align in that way, as you were saying, Pia, I think actually helps you take focus off of some things that can maybe wait or aren't as relevant, and double down on the areas where it matters.
Exactly. And that's the worst argument I've ever heard, was that we have a HR year will that we need to follow.
Okay. So why is that the worst?
Wow.
Why is that the worst argument? Yeah.
Because then you do your processes and your models because you have to, not because it brings you any value in the business. So you need to be a little bit pragmatic about. We have models. We have professional models within HR that we can use for performance evaluation and stuff like that. If you have not a mature organization or business, then you need to introduce it slowly to see how does this make value for you? What does this do? What would we use it for? What's the aim of this? So introduce it in a light version in the first place, and then you could build on it going along when managers and the management team sees the effect of it. Mm-hmm. I think that's something like that you mean, perhaps, Thijs?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, I I think that's pretty much exactly the thing. And of course, that also means you need your operational side in order, right? You really do need to do both. It's that, at least as a leader, the responsiveness of HR when there is a mini crisis of some sort, right? Like, I don't know, really valued employee showing signs of churn. What do we do, right? I don't want that process to take 2 months. I need something soon, and I need to understand, okay, what are the parameters within which we can find a solution? Is there budget for this or not? And oftentimes that I've noticed that can be quite difficult. So these ad hoc kind of tasks between managers and HR really grind things to a halt. If something is a standard process that happens every year or every quarter, it works, and it's sort of regular, like clockwork, if you got your stuff in order. But anything out of the ordinary, I kind of see two patterns. It's the, complete, like, we don't know what to do, and we need to go look for everything that, from scratch almost. Or there is a tendency, and I think that again comes from the very operational point of view, to then create a process for the one-off request that I have. So now it's like, oh, I know how to do that. So we'll just create a process for that. And then, 2 months go by, and then they have a process, and then they feed my problem into that process. And the outcome of that is probably something completely different than what I originally was asking for, because now there is a process and we have a philosophy, and there's, all that work has been done, and maybe that's the right thing, I don't know. But for me and for the employee in question that I'm trying to save, the outcome might not be what was expected. So that creates tension, and it makes it then very difficult to then engage at a lot higher level, at a strategic level, because you're like, okay, well, the last time I asked you for something which to me is maybe simple, maybe to HR is very difficult, but I'm like, hey, here's where I need help. Of course, that's going to be very difficult from a confidence and a believability, let's say, perspective then, right? And I'm not saying I'm seeing that everywhere, but I've definitely had my share of experiences along those lines.
What would you rather see happening? And maybe, Pia, you have an answer to that. Maybe you know the answer to that. What should rather happen than what Thijs just described?
Well, I have a very good example, because the recruitment process is exactly one of those processes where it's easy to just say, well, a process will take 8 to 12 weeks. That's a recruitment process for a new hire. But if it's a resource that you need to get onboarded right now, it's critical, then you need to bypass the process. Then you can't wait 4 to or 8 to 12 weeks before you have a signed contract, and then perhaps there will be an additional 2 to 3 months before the candidate can actually start. So if that's the case, then you would need to bypass. So you would need to say, okay, then we need to do this a different way. Okay, how do we do that? And depending on the profile that you need and so forth, you have different options to do that. And within 2 weeks, you can have 2 or 3 actual really good candidates. So I don't know, get a good example of that.
Yeah.
How do we mitigate that ending up in tailor making every little thing and never getting a process in order? Can we really do both?
I think it's doable, because you also have to challenge a hiring manager. They're always too late in the starting of hiring, but you have to challenge them. You have to make sure that you get the right profile. If in my experience, a hiring manager lost a blue triangle, they want a new blue triangle. That's basically often what happens. Then we need to ask all these questions. Are you sure it's a blue triangle? What are the tasks now, and not the least in 2 and 3 years' time? What will competences develop? What kind of needed competences will develop in the near future? Should we try and look for a candidate with a profile that even matches that even better? Or even go a step further, being a little bit more strategic and saying, if it's not for the position right now, then perhaps it's for a career that we want to recruit. Then it's a talent acquisition, and it's not just a recruitment. So challenge the hiring manager to get the right profile. And then you can actually get into the process, and so that's why it also depends on the hiring manager's experiences in hiring. Because if it's a new manager not having hired before, then you need perhaps to help them a little bit more to understand the process. So there can be different angles to kind of work your way around.
So there are many roles to play for HR for sure. So there's a question in the chat, and I've seen it also elsewhere. But when you are newly appointed HR and you come into the organization, what would you do first? What's your recommendations for the newly hired in HR professionals, and maybe not even at the top level, but somewhere else in the organization?
Get to know the organization really, really, really well.
How?
Talk to people, visit people, have intro dialogues, ask a lot of questions about what they do and how is this connected with the other department. Understand the connections in the organization, understand the structure of the organization. This is your workplace, actually, the way I see it. The organization is HR's workplace. So this is how you can actually make things happen quicker if you know the organization really well. So this is the one must do first, I think. Then of course you also, during getting the organization, knowing the organization, you will also get a very good feel of the culture, because culture will be the next step. What can be done in this culture and what cannot be done in this culture. So that's the way you can actually behave or get things done in a more smooth and quick way if you understand what the culture is like. So and that's our, what can you call it? It's a booster to know your culture in HR. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I think, Thijs, you have something to say there as well, because you touch upon some of these things here in your article as well, right?
Yeah. I think so. I completely agree with that part. I would say, and I can't of course speak for every HR professional out there, but again, maybe a bit towards that strategy. There's also certain things in any strategic role that you sort of know that you kind of want a known good kind of thing to be in place, right? So starting that work not too late, right? You can definitely do things in parallel. One of the lessons I learned is what are the sort of core things that I know I need, that I know are good, and let's get those in place, and let's not wait 6 months before we start that process. So that is definitely an area as well. And then there was another point that I had just now. I know it slipped my mind, but it was in reaction to Pia's points about getting to know. Oh yeah, decision-making process. As a leader, one of the things that I've mentored people on also quite a bit is like figure out how decisions are made and then executed. And it's maybe the sum total of the organization and the culture and all of it put together is really like, okay, how do decisions end up getting there? How do you raise a point? How do you get it closed off, decided? And not just that you get permission to execute it for yourself, but that it's something that gets executed everywhere, right? Like especially at that sort of senior leadership level, when you talk about cross-functional problems, how do those get raised? How are they discussed? How long does that take? Who is playing what role in there? And how do we finally create a decision? And even more importantly, how is that decision then translated into action, both on the HR side, but also everywhere else, right? Whether it's an HR topic or a technical topic or whatever it might be. But I always found that can tell you a lot about an organization very, very quickly. If the organization is not able to do that, that needs to be any exec's first order of business, is to put in a decision-making culture that makes sense.
And once you figured that out, do you then just execute on the decisions being made, or do you influence them, or how does that play out as at the strategic level for HR? Was it a vague question? Do I need to ask it again, Pia?
Yeah, thanks. If you can do that.
For you, maybe it's a given. So you maybe not, you don't think too much about it. But I've heard a lot of people who have trouble finding the courage maybe to changing the ways decisions are made, to be listened to be really taken seriously, or to be welcomed. And and then maybe even find themselves in a position where they feel that they don't deserve it in the first place, or that they have a hard time getting to deserve it because they're not invited in. So you were invited in for your first position, so maybe that's why you are like puzzled by the question. But what if you are not, and what if you are not invited into that, and you found out that the way decisions are made, you are not being listened to? How can you carve yourself some space there to be listened to? What does it take?
Okay, now I understand better now. And perhaps if I should relate to myself, being giving the silver plate from the start, but actually being able to maintain the plate. So I think it takes a little courage, actually. You should be able to speak your mind among your peers in the C-suite. You cannot be afraid, and you cannot be too vague. You have to be quite clear about your points that you make. I think you have to argue in the same way that the business argues. So again, if you speak too much HR lingo, you are lost. You have lost them. So speak in the language that they understand. And being courageous is both on your. You should be ambitious in what you want to achieve, and then be courageous in telling them so. So I've quite clear communication, quite clear that you want this, that they can feel that you want this, that you have something to contribute with. Then I think they'll see it, because if you are in doubt yourself, then they will be in doubt.
Yeah.
So I think
what are some of the arguments you can maybe use to make yourself clear or communicate clearly about why this is important, why it's important to listen to you? And Thijs, feel to answer as well.
Yeah. I think that's what you do when you present the discussions that you want to open, and the decisions that need to be made. You can't say, this is important. You have to explain why it's important. Then it becomes important.
And what could an example be of that?
Performance review. The annual performance review is something that can be a little not so touchable. It's quite difficult for some managers to get their hands around why we do this and what we get out of it. That's when you actually argue what we'll get out of it, because we don't have a succession plan if you hadn't done an overview of where the performance in the organization is at. So how do you make a salary revision if you don't know what to measure that up against? So if you explain these benefits from doing the revision of the review, then they understand why we do it. Okay. So that's explaining why it's important to do the review as a part of what it leads to.
Yeah.
And we discussed this a little bit previously, right? Which is then it, to me, leads into this whole notion of storytelling and being able to, really articulate what it is you're aiming to do in a very good way, right? And that's something which, in its own right, needs confidence, needs gravitas of some sort, and that can be difficult, right? For any less experienced leader to break through that wall almost of, hey, I'm actually out there, I'm saying things that will have a real impact, and if I'm wrong, it'll be on my head, and then still say I'm going to do it, right? Yeah. I am going to make this point here. And I found most executive teams to be quite open to that, and also be quite open to be told you're wrong, right? Like you can have an actual discussion. So I think that storytelling and that, to me, weaves in a bit of what Pia was saying, right? Oh, you've actually found a slide. So what Pia was saying about speaking the language of the business, right? And sort of, as I'm saying here, right, adapting the story to the context, in this case, in the audience, and knowing what it is they need to be told and how they need to be told it. And I think it's easy to see that, you're being manipulative or something. No, it's just about really being clear, right? You can see this in learning and development. There have been all these theories about how many different ways of learning, let's say, there are. This is of course very similar. You're adapting, the content to the context, and doing so in a smooth and persuasive manner. You've got the numbers backing you up. Then people will engage on that. They will find it interesting, and they will probably be diving into the numbers themselves if they can, and be like, hey, wait a second, how does that work for my side of the organization? And hey, what you were saying before, actually, hey, that makes sense. I can see it now. And how can we change that, right? You're opening the door for that level of discussion then. If you come empty-handed, there is nothing really much to discuss, and people aren't going to engage in the same way.
No, but that also means that maybe you're moving their HR function from being a more, technical, operational part where you implement decisions made by others, to shifting towards being, engaging in dialogues, asking a lot of questions to enlighten you on the decisions you would like to put forward for people to make, and linking that gap between, what's so that it's better understood by people in the organization what is needed. That's also what you're saying. And that maybe is a totally new way of looking at the HR function. And we've seen this shift lately from many organizations mainly talking about HR to now talking about people. Do you see a link there? Is that maybe why many organizations now talk about a chief people's officer, or instead of just purely HR?
I hope so. Maybe to bounce on that a little bit, of course, in the sort of HR software space, we've always talked about HRS, HR system, HRIS, information system, etc., and just generally human resources, right? It does feel a little cold. And nowadays, it seems we've moved on, and now we're calling it human capital management, which is even worse. Like, if you call yourself that, more power to you. But for me, I'm just like, it doesn't jive for me at all. It makes it feel so abstract. It's almost like a capital. It's a financial instrument all of a sudden. I'm like, I'm not as a person, I'm not a number, on a spreadsheet.
No,
but which is it actually also is, because when we talk about a company's resources, then you have different resources. People are one of them. Workforce is one of them. So but I don't like the word capital as well, because I think it's too cold as well. So I've seen more and more organizations go to people and culture, chief officer of people and culture, and I think that makes a lot of sense. Because coming back to one of my previous points, it will always come back to culture. You'll always work around the culture, trying to improve culture to support a strategy, a business strategy. Because this saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. But it's very, very true. It's very, very true. So you need to observe your culture. You need to impact your culture in the way that it supports your strategy, and that's why the people and culture title is a much more right title, I think.
Yes. So just to maybe sum up, because we only have a few minutes left, it sounds like what you're saying is that to go from the operational to the more strategic level, or an HR function, requires that you know your organization, you know the business, you can speak the language of business, you can engage in dialogues with your managers, and you can train them to do the same with their employees in order to implement the strategy better. You need to make the link between the initiatives you're enforcing on the organization to performance and to the value for the whole business. And you also need to believe in yourself enough to really take your seat in a way where you then deserve it. But that was my quick summary of what I heard you say today. So I would like for you to just give your quick summary of maybe some main takeaways that you would like to give the audience here towards the end, something that you really want people to remember as a key takeaway from this webinar. And Pia, why don't you go first?
Sure. I think you actually captured it quite well, Pernille. So there was not a lot for me to add to that, other than mindset. It's a mindset. So there's no one recipe that will fix this for you. It's a mindset that you need to bring along with you on how you look on your role in HR and what you can achieve with it. So I think take a good look at your mindset. How do you think about yourself and your role?
Thank you,
Very
Pia.
good. Yeah. I actually will just follow that and actually say, like, I completely agree on the mindset thing. It's really often for any growing function and any maturing function in organization. Again, I've seen this in product, I've seen it in marketing, to go from a scarcity mindset of, we only have this and no, to an abundance mindset of, hey, we can be creative. We can find different ways of attaining the goals that we've set for ourselves, the strategies, executing them properly. And I will also take away sort of that the importance of that cultural element, right? I think it's always there and it's always clear, but trying to really make that into something that is aligned with the business and not sort of diametrically opposed to the business, because I've definitely seen those types of companies as well. And, that can work for a while, and then you probably run into a wall quite hard. And so that's something I will definitely take away as well. And yeah, the confidence part in everything you do is key, right? If you're standing there and you can't explain it well enough and people kind of see your fear, then, then it's very unlikely that they're going to go, yay. But on the other hand, the opposite is also true. You can get people to come along, you can get them to see things your way, actually dive into the problem with you, come with their own solutions, and now you've got something. Right now you've got a real working relationship that actually drives far more of the business than I think we're doing at the moment necessarily. So
we are ending on a positive note when it comes to the value of HR and the people and culture function, right? That it's needed, and we need you to step up and bring topics to the agenda and inform the decision making and help implement great initiatives. And there we really need the understanding and the psychology of the people in the organization and the politics and everything that's going on, so that you can implement it best. So thank you so much, Pia and Thijs, for participating in this webinar and enlightening us on the topic. It's been a pleasure having you here. There are a few more questions we didn't get to answer, also in the comments and the chat. We'll try to do that with more articles and topics. So stay tuned for more on this topic. And thank you again, Pia and Thijs.
Thanks so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for watching.
Got nothing inside, wanna watch the world passing by. With you by my side, maybe this ride can make things right.